Welcome to a chapter a day. Most people believe their life is shaped by the big decisions. The job they choose, the city they move to, the relationship they commit to. But that belief is wrong. Your life is actually built from thousands of tiny, nearly invisible decisions you make every day. Decisions so automatic you barely notice them happening. Whether you speak up or stay quiet. Whether you try once more or stop early. Whether you assume something will work or assume it won't. These micro-decisions form patterns. And over time, those patterns quietly construct the architecture of your life. The problem is that most people never examine the invisible beliefs guiding those decisions. They think they're being realistic, when they're actually being conditioned. They think they're being cautious, when they're actually being controlled by an identity they formed years ago. They think they're waiting for the right moment, when the truth is they're protecting an old self-image that feels safer than growth. And because these beliefs remain hidden, life begins unfolding in a strangely predictable way. The same types of opportunities appear. The same types of fears show up. The same limits quietly repeat themselves. But once you understand how this internal architecture works, everything changes. You start noticing the silent rules your mind is following. You start questioning the assumptions that once felt permanent. And slowly, you begin making different micro-decisions. That's when something powerful begins to happen. Your identity expands. Your confidence stops being forced and starts becoming natural. And life begins unfolding in ways that once seemed reserved for other people. In this audiobook, we are not going to focus on motivation. We are going to expose the hidden mechanics that shape your results. Because once you see how your internal system actually works, you can redesign it. And when you redesign the system, your life stops repeating itself and starts evolving. Chapter 1. Most people believe their life is shaped by big decisions. Most people believe their lives are determined by the big decisions. The college they choose, the career path they chase, the city they move to, the relationship they commit to. They imagine these choices define the trajectory of their lives. But here's the truth. That belief is incomplete. Because your life is not built solely from the big decisions you can see. It's built from thousands of tiny, nearly invisible choices you make every day. Choices so automatic you barely notice them happening. Whether you speak up or stay silent. Whether you try once more or give up. Whether you assume something will work or assume it won't. These are the micro-decisions. And over time, they form patterns. Those patterns quietly construct the architecture of your life. They shape your experiences, your relationships, your confidence, your sense of possibility, and even your opportunities. The problem is most people never examine the invisible beliefs guiding those micro-decisions. They think they are being realistic, when they are actually being conditioned. They think they are being cautious, when they are actually being controlled by an identity they formed years ago. They think they are waiting for the right moment, when the truth is they are protecting an old self-image that feels safer than growth. Because these beliefs remain hidden, life begins unfolding in predictable ways. The same types of opportunities appear. The same types of fears show up. The same limits quietly repeat themselves. It's as though your life is on autopilot, and the autopilot is following rules you barely remember setting. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people, both trying to grow their careers. One speaks up in meetings. One stays quiet. One asks for help. One struggles alone. One tries one more time. One gives up after the first failure. At first glance, these decisions seem small, almost meaningless. But over months and years, these choices compound. The first person gets noticed. Opportunities expand. Confidence grows. The second person remains stuck. Patterns of inaction silently reinforce limits. And the difference isn't luck. It's the accumulation of micro-decisions, those small choices guided by hidden beliefs. The subtlety is what makes this dangerous. Most people don't realize that every thought, assumption, and belief is shaping the decisions they make. They don't notice the quiet rules running their life. Rules like, I'm not the kind of person who speaks up. I always fail when I try something new. People like me don't get opportunities like that. These rules are invisible but powerful, and they silently engineer the outcomes you experience. Because of these invisible patterns, life can feel stuck, predictable, repetitive. The same problems recur. The same fears resurface. The same limits quietly reinforce themselves. And you may think, I'm just being realistic. I'm just cautious. I'm just waiting for the right moment. But the truth is, you are protecting an old self-image, one that feels safe, one that avoids growth. And here's the secret. The moment you see the invisible rules, everything changes. You begin noticing the assumptions guiding your choices, the habits that subtly define your results, the thoughts that quietly repeat day after day without your conscious awareness. And when you notice these rules, you gain freedom. You can begin to question assumptions that once felt permanent. You can start taking micro-decisions intentionally rather than unconsciously. You can begin designing your life from conscious awareness rather than habitual patterns. And when that happens, something remarkable begins to unfold. Your identity expands. Your confidence stops being forced and starts becoming natural. Your life begins unfolding in ways that once seemed reserved for other people. Opportunities appear that feel aligned, almost effortless. Challenges appear that feel like invitations to growth, rather than threats to safety. Your results begin to reflect your true potential, rather than the limitations of an old self-image. In this audiobook, we are not here to give you motivation. We are not here to give you temporary energy or a burst of enthusiasm that fades in a few hours. We are here to expose the hidden mechanics of how your mind creates results. Because your life is not random. Your results are not luck. They are the product of micro-decisions, guided by invisible beliefs, forming patterns that create your reality. And the most empowering realization is this. Once you understand how your internal system works, you can redesign it. You can rewrite the rules that have been running your decisions. You can change the assumptions that have quietly limited you. You can start choosing in alignment with your highest self every single day. When you redesign the system, life stops repeating itself. Life begins evolving. Your confidence grows naturally. Your identity expands effortlessly. Your potential begins manifesting in ways that once seemed impossible. Imagine this. Every micro-decision reinforcing growth, confidence, and abundance. Every habit silently building the life you want. Every thought aligning with the identity you are meant to become. That is the architecture we will explore in this audiobook. We will uncover the hidden scripts that have quietly run your life. We will show you the assumptions, rules, and patterns shaping your choices. And we will give you the tools to take conscious control, so every micro-decision is aligned with growth, potential, and empowerment. The journey begins here. Not with motivation, not with external tricks, but with understanding. Once you see the invisible structure of your decisions, you can design a life that expands automatically, intentionally, and beautifully. And that is where true transformation begins. Chapter 2: The mind protects the identity you already have. There is a quiet force operating in your life that most people never recognize. It does not shout. It does not announce itself. It does not appear dramatic. But it influences almost every decision you make. That force is identity. Not the identity written on a document. Not the identity people see on the surface. But the identity you quietly believe about yourself. The internal description you carry about who you are. Every person has one. Sometimes it sounds like this. I'm not really a leader. I've never been good with money. I'm the quiet one. I'm just not that confident. Most people treat these statements like casual observations. They say them lightly, almost jokingly, but the mind treats them very differently. To the brain, these statements are not comments. They are instructions. Your brain is designed to keep your identity consistent, not necessarily improved, not necessarily expanded, just consistent. Because from the brain's perspective, consistency equals safety. Predictability equals safety. Familiar identity equals safety, even if that identity is limiting. This is why people often feel resistance when they try to change. The resistance isn't just about the task itself. It's about the identity the task threatens. Imagine someone who has quietly believed their entire life that they are not confident. Now imagine that same person entering a situation where confidence is required. Speaking in front of a group, approaching someone important, sharing an idea publicly. In that moment, something subtle happens. The brain notices that the behavior contradicts the identity. And when that happens, it tries to restore balance. But the brain rarely says, "Stop. This doesn't match your identity." Instead, it generates something that feels much more reasonable. Hesitation, doubt, overthinking, second-guessing. Suddenly the person feels the need to prepare more, to wait a little longer, to make sure everything is perfect first. And because those thoughts sound logical, they are rarely questioned. But beneath the surface, the real motive is simple. The mind is protecting the identity. Think about how often this pattern appears in life. A person wants to start a business, but the idea sits in their mind for months or years. They research endlessly. They analyze every possible outcome. They wait for the perfect conditions. On the surface, it looks like caution, but often something deeper is happening. Starting a business requires stepping into a new identity. A person who takes initiative. A person who tolerates uncertainty. A person who believes they are capable of creating something. And if that identity feels unfamiliar, the mind hesitates. Not because the idea is bad, but because the identity is new. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of personal growth. People assume the challenge is learning new skills. But the real challenge is becoming someone new. And the mind resists identity change more strongly than almost anything else. Because identity is the framework that keeps life predictable. Here is something worth noticing. Many people say they want improvement, but unconsciously, they also want identity stability. They want success without becoming different. They want growth without changing how they see themselves. They want new results while protecting the old identity. And those two forces quietly compete. One pushes toward expansion. The other pulls back toward familiarity. Think about moments in your own life when you considered doing something bold. Maybe you wanted to share an idea. Maybe you wanted to pursue a new opportunity. Maybe you wanted to step into a leadership role. At first, the idea felt exciting. But soon after, a wave of hesitation appeared. Questions started forming. What if I'm not ready? What if it doesn't work? What if people judge me? Those thoughts feel like rational evaluation. But often they are the mind attempting to preserve identity. Because if you take the action and succeed, something changes. You can no longer claim the old identity. The person who once said, "I'm not confident," now has evidence of confidence. The person who once believed, "I'm not capable of that," now has proof otherwise. And the mind must adjust. That adjustment can feel uncomfortable. So the brain sometimes chooses the easier route. Avoid the action. Protect the identity. Maintain the familiar story. This is why people sometimes sabotage opportunities without realizing it. Not intentionally, not consciously, but through subtle behaviors. Delaying action, overcomplicating plans, convincing themselves that the timing isn't right. These behaviors feel like thoughtful decision-making, but they often serve a deeper purpose, preserving the identity that already exists. If you watch this pattern closely, you begin to see it everywhere. In careers, in relationships, in financial habits, in creative pursuits. People rarely behave outside the boundaries of their identity for very long. Eventually, they drift back toward the person they believe they are. Imagine a thermostat in a room. If the temperature rises too high, the system cools it down. If the temperature drops too low, it warms the room again. The goal of the thermostat is stability. Your identity works in a similar way. If your behavior starts drifting too far from the identity you believe about yourself, the mind attempts to restore balance. It brings you back to the familiar level. Not necessarily the best level, just the familiar one. This is why lasting change requires more than temporary effort. You can push yourself to act differently for a while. But if your identity remains unchanged, the mind eventually pulls you back. Real transformation happens when identity expands. When the story you tell about yourself begins to shift. Instead of saying, "I'm not confident," you begin noticing moments where you acted confidently. Instead of saying, "I'm not the type of person who does that," you begin experimenting with behaviors that challenge that assumption. Little by little, the identity evolves. And once identity evolves, behavior becomes easier. Because now the actions feel aligned with the person you believe you are. This is why confidence often appears gradually rather than instantly. People expect confidence to arrive first. But in reality, confidence often follows identity expansion. You try something slightly outside your comfort zone. You realize you survived. Then you try something slightly bigger. Eventually, the mind collects enough evidence to update the story. The person who once believed, "I'm not confident," begins to realize something surprising. Maybe that identity was never accurate. Maybe it was just a script that went unchallenged for too long. So the next time hesitation appears, pause for a moment. Ask yourself a simple question. Is this hesitation protecting me? Or protecting my identity? Because those are two very different things. Sometimes caution is wise. But other times hesitation is simply the mind defending an outdated story. And once you begin noticing this pattern, something interesting happens. You start recognizing the moments where identity is quietly guiding your decisions. The moment you almost speak up but stop. The moment you almost try something but hesitate. The moment you almost take a step forward but convince yourself to wait. These moments reveal the boundaries of the identity you've been living inside. But boundaries can expand. Identities can evolve. Stories can change. And the first step is awareness. Because once you see how identity influences behavior, you gain a powerful ability. You can begin choosing actions that stretch the identity rather than protect it. Small actions, simple actions, but actions that gradually rewrite the script. And as you continue through this journey, remember this phrase. It explains more about human behavior than most people realize. Your mind protects who you think you are, even when that identity is limiting you. Not because the mind wants to limit you, but because the mind values stability. Your job is to gently expand that stability, to allow your identity to grow large enough to hold the life you want to create. And once that happens, the actions that once felt difficult begin to feel natural. Chapter 3: Most limits begin as quiet assumptions. When people think about limitations, they usually imagine something obvious. A lack of resources, a difficult environment, a major obstacle standing directly in the way. But in reality, many of the most powerful limits in life are far quieter than that. They don't look like barriers. They look like simple thoughts. Quick assumptions that pass through the mind so casually you barely notice them. Thoughts like, "That probably wouldn't work for me. I'm not really the type of person who does that. People like me don't usually succeed at that. Someone else probably already did it better. These things are easier for other people." None of these thoughts feel dramatic. None of them feel like a major decision. But something important happens the moment they appear. A door quietly closes. And once the door closes, the opportunity behind it is never explored. This is how many limits are created. Not through failure, not through rejection, but through assumption. An assumption is simply a conclusion you accept without investigation. And the mind makes these conclusions constantly, sometimes based on past experiences, sometimes based on what other people believe, sometimes based on stories you've heard about how the world works. The problem is that once the mind accepts an assumption, it stops searching for alternatives. It treats the assumption like a fact, and behavior adjusts accordingly. Imagine someone who carries the assumption. Successful people are naturally more confident than I am. Now watch what happens. When opportunities appear that require confidence, leading a project, presenting an idea, starting something new, the mind immediately references the assumption. This isn't really my area. They're better suited for this. I'll let someone else take the lead. The opportunity disappears, not because it was impossible, but because the assumption quietly closed the door. Here's another example. Someone might assume, making significant money requires extreme risk. If that belief exists in the background, the mind automatically filters opportunities through it. New ideas feel dangerous. Investments feel intimidating. Career moves feel unstable. So the person stays within familiar financial boundaries. Once again, the assumption quietly shapes behavior, and behavior shapes results. What makes assumptions so powerful is how invisible they are. They rarely appear as strong statements like, "I refuse to try." Instead, they appear as soft, reasonable thoughts. "Maybe later. I'll think about it. That's probably not realistic right now." These phrases sound harmless, but they perform an important function. They end the exploration process. Think about how many ideas people dismiss before even trying. A business idea dismissed because it seems too complicated. A creative idea dismissed because it seems too competitive. A career move dismissed because it seems unlikely. Most of these ideas never receive serious evaluation. They are rejected within seconds. Not through evidence, through assumption. If you observe your own thinking closely, you will notice something interesting. The mind loves certainty. It prefers quick conclusions over open questions. Because questions require energy. Questions require exploration. Questions introduce uncertainty. Assumptions, on the other hand, are efficient. They simplify decisions quickly. But that efficiency comes with a cost. Possibility disappears before it is explored. Now here is something worth considering. Many of the opportunities that change people's lives start out looking uncertain. They don't appear with guarantees. They don't arrive with perfect clarity. They arrive as possibilities. And if the mind immediately assumes those possibilities won't work, the exploration never happens. This is why two people can encounter the same opportunity and experience completely different outcomes. One person asks, "What would happen if I tried?" The other person assumes, "That probably won't work." One door stays open. The other closes. Over time, these tiny decisions accumulate. One unexplored idea becomes 10. 10 becomes 100. Eventually, the person begins to believe something about their life. That kind of success just isn't meant for me. But the truth is often much simpler. The success wasn't rejected. It was never explored. Because the assumptions closed the doors too quickly. The interesting thing about assumptions is that they feel like knowledge. When someone says, "That probably wouldn't work for me," they usually feel confident about the statement. But if you ask them a deeper question, "How do you know?" often there is no clear answer. The belief is based on feeling rather than evidence. A general impression, a past experience that may not even apply anymore, or something someone once said that became internalized over time. This is why assumptions are so powerful. They disguise themselves as logic. But in reality, many of them are simply untested stories. Stories about what is possible. stories about who you are, stories about how the world works, and stories, when repeated long enough, start feeling like facts. But here's the important realization. Assumptions only control behavior when they remain unexamined. The moment you begin questioning them, their influence weakens. For example, the next time a thought appears saying, "That probably wouldn't work for me," pause. Instead of accepting the statement immediately, ask yourself, what makes me think that? Where did this belief come from? Is it based on experience or just familiarity? And what would happen if I tested it instead of assuming it? That simple shift from assumption to curiosity changes everything. Because curiosity keeps doors open. Curiosity is one of the most powerful antidotes to limiting assumptions. It replaces certainty with exploration. Instead of deciding something won't work, curiosity asks, what might happen if I tried? Instead of assuming something isn't possible, curiosity asks, how could this be possible? These questions create movement, and movement creates discovery. This is why awareness is so important. Because once you begin noticing assumptions, you realize how frequently they appear. Dozens of times each day. Sometimes in small moments. Sometimes in decisions that shape the direction of your life. And when you begin seeing them clearly, something remarkable happens. You regain the ability to choose whether those assumptions deserve authority. Here is a simple exercise that can change the way you think. For the next 24 hours, become an observer of your own assumptions. Pay attention to the quick conclusions your mind makes. Notice when you dismiss an idea immediately. Notice when you assume something will fail. Notice when you tell yourself something probably isn't for you. You don't need to correct every assumption right away. Just notice them. Write a few of them down if you can, because awareness alone is powerful. When assumptions become visible, they lose some of their control. You might be surprised by what you discover. You may notice assumptions about your abilities, assumptions about money, assumptions about relationships, assumptions about opportunities, assumptions about how people will respond to you. Some of these assumptions may be accurate, but many will simply be old stories repeating themselves, stories that were never examined closely. And once you see that pattern, something important becomes clear. Limits rarely arrive as obvious obstacles. They arrive as quiet thoughts, soft conclusions, small assumptions that guide behavior without demanding attention. But those small assumptions accumulate. They shape decisions. They shape habits. They shape the direction of your life. So remember this phrase. You'll hear it again and again because it reveals something essential about how limits form. Assumptions silently design your limits. Not because assumptions are always wrong, but because assumptions end exploration. And exploration is where growth happens. Exploration is where opportunities appear. Exploration is where new versions of yourself begin to emerge. As you continue through this journey, keep watching the assumptions that appear in your thinking. Not to judge them, not to fight them, just to notice them. Because once you notice them, you gain something powerful. The ability to ask a better question. Not, is this assumption true? But something far more useful. What might become possible if this assumption wasn't? Chapter 4. The brain hates unfamiliar success. Most people assume that if something is good for them, their mind will naturally support it. More opportunity, more success, more progress. It seems logical to believe the brain would welcome improvement. But the brain doesn't operate based on what is best for you. It operates based on what is familiar. And familiarity is one of the strongest forces guiding human behavior. Your nervous system is constantly scanning the environment and asking one simple question. Is this normal for me? If the answer is yes, the brain relaxes. If the answer is no, the brain becomes cautious. This process developed as a survival mechanism. For most of human history, unfamiliar environments often meant danger. So the brain learned to trust what it already knew. Familiar patterns meant safety. Unfamiliar patterns required attention. And that wiring still influences how we respond to change today. The challenge is that success often introduces unfamiliar conditions. New responsibilities, more visibility, higher expectations, different environments. Even positive changes can trigger internal discomfort if they fall outside what your mind considers normal. This is why people sometimes feel surprisingly uneasy when good things start happening. A promotion may create excitement, but also pressure. A growing business may bring opportunity, but also uncertainty. Recognition may feel rewarding, but also expose someone to judgment. These experiences stretch the boundaries of what feels familiar, and the brain responds by becoming alert. At first, the discomfort may appear subtle. A little hesitation before accepting a new opportunity. A moment of overthinking before making a decision. A small voice suggesting that maybe now isn't the right time. These reactions rarely appear dramatic. They often feel logical, responsible even. But underneath the surface, the brain is simply reacting to unfamiliar territory. Consider someone who has spent years in a predictable role at work. Their routine is stable. Their expectations are clear. They know exactly how their days will unfold. Now imagine that person is offered a leadership position. The promotion represents growth, higher income, greater influence. But it also introduces unfamiliar conditions. They will now make decisions that affect others. Their performance will be more visible. They may face new challenges they've never navigated before. Even if they want the opportunity, part of the brain may resist it, because it isn't familiar. This internal resistance doesn't mean the opportunity is wrong. It simply means the brain is encountering something new. And the brain always evaluates new situations cautiously. This is why many people unintentionally slow their own progress. Not because they lack ability, not because they lack ambition, but because unfamiliar success activates internal tension. And the mind interprets that tension as a warning. Here's where something interesting happens. When discomfort appears, the brain begins searching for ways to reduce it. One of the easiest ways to reduce discomfort is to return to familiar territory, familiar routines, familiar challenges, familiar expectations. Even if those conditions are limiting, the familiar always feels safer than the unknown. This explains why some people unknowingly step away from opportunities that could change their lives. They delay important decisions. They postpone projects. They tell themselves they'll pursue the opportunity later. Sometimes they even convince themselves the opportunity wasn't that appealing in the first place. These responses are not acts of laziness. They are acts of protection. The brain is trying to guide the person back toward what feels normal. But growth almost always requires stepping into unfamiliar territory. A new career path will feel unfamiliar. A larger goal will feel unfamiliar. Greater visibility will feel unfamiliar. Every meaningful step forward introduces conditions the brain hasn't experienced before, which means discomfort is not a signal that something is wrong. It's often a signal that something is new. Think about the first time someone learns a new skill. Driving a car, public speaking, leading a team, starting a business. At first, everything feels awkward. Attention is required for every small step. The mind becomes highly alert. But over time, something changes. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. And once something becomes familiar, the brain relaxes. Confidence grows naturally because the nervous system recognizes the situation as normal. The same principle applies to success. Success doesn't automatically feel comfortable. It becomes comfortable through repeated exposure, through gradually expanding what the brain considers normal. But during the early stages, discomfort is unavoidable. And if someone interprets that discomfort incorrectly, they may retreat to the familiar too quickly. For example, someone who starts gaining attention for their work may suddenly feel pressure. More people are watching. More people are expecting results. At first, the attention feels exciting. Then it begins to feel overwhelming. If the person isn't aware of how the brain reacts to unfamiliar success, they might unconsciously reduce their visibility. They might stop sharing ideas, stop promoting their work, stop taking bold steps. Not because they lost interest, but because their nervous system is trying to restore familiarity. This pattern appears in many areas of life. People reach a new level of income and suddenly make choices that return them to their previous financial patterns. People build momentum in a project and then lose consistency. People move closer to a breakthrough and suddenly become hesitant. From the outside, these patterns look confusing, but internally, the brain is simply reacting to unfamiliar conditions. Understanding this changes how you interpret discomfort. Instead of asking, "Why does this feel uncomfortable?" you begin asking, "Is this uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar?" That question shifts the perspective completely. Because unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. It does not mean impossible. It simply means new. When people learn to recognize this distinction, they become more patient with the growth process. They stop expecting progress to feel easy immediately. They stop interpreting temporary discomfort as a reason to retreat. Instead, they begin allowing themselves time to adapt. They give their nervous system space to adjust to new environments, new responsibilities, and new expectations. And gradually, something powerful happens. What once felt intimidating begins to feel normal. Your brain is incredibly adaptable. It learns through repetition, through exposure, through experience. The same nervous system that once resisted unfamiliar success eventually accepts it as part of everyday life. But that transformation only happens if someone stays in the unfamiliar long enough for it to become familiar. This brings us to an important realization. Your comfort zone is often misunderstood. People imagine the comfort zone as a place where everything feels relaxing and easy. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes the comfort zone includes stress. Sometimes it includes frustration. Sometimes it includes limitations. The common factor isn't comfort. It's familiarity. The brain prefers situations it recognizes, even if those situations are not ideal, which leads to a phrase worth remembering. Your comfort zone is not about comfort, it's about familiarity. You may remain in situations that frustrate you. You may tolerate patterns that limit you, not because they feel good, but because they feel known, and the brain trusts what it knows. Growth begins when familiarity expands. When you allow yourself to remain in new environments long enough for the brain to update its definition of normal. When unfamiliar success stops feeling threatening and starts feeling natural. That process takes time. It takes repetition. And most importantly, it requires patience with the temporary discomfort that accompanies progress. So the next time you experience hesitation when approaching something bigger than your current circumstances, pause before assuming something is wrong. You may not be encountering danger. You may simply be encountering unfamiliar success. And unfamiliar success always feels strange at first. But with enough exposure, the unfamiliar eventually becomes familiar. And once it becomes familiar, it becomes part of who you are. Chapter 5. Why Your Future Self Feels Like a Stranger. In the last chapter, we explored something critical. Your brain resists unfamiliar success. It prefers the known, the predictable, the familiar, even when those familiar patterns limit your life. But this resistance doesn't stop at immediate opportunities. It reaches far into the future, quietly shaping how you plan, dream, and act. It influences the life you imagine for yourself, and often, the life you actually create. Most people carry a vague sense of their future self, an ideal version of themselves living the life they desire. But here's the truth few realize. Your future self feels like a stranger. It's not because your goals are unrealistic. It's because your brain struggles to relate to a version of you that doesn't yet feel familiar. The mind isn't designed to operate in hypothetical futures. It prioritizes the present identity, the one it knows, trusts, and can predict. Think about it. You might imagine yourself in the future, confident, influential, financially free, healthy, or creatively fulfilled. But in this moment, you still act according to your current identity. You hesitate, procrastinate, or resist opportunities that would align with that future self. Why? Because your brain is protecting you from unfamiliar territory once again. The person you could become is not yet recognizable, and the brain doesn't prioritize the goals of a stranger living in a hypothetical future. This is one reason visualization alone sometimes fails. Simply imagining an ideal version of yourself isn't enough. If your brain cannot relate to that identity, it doesn't mobilize behavior to make it real. Your mind says, in subtle ways, "That's not really you yet. Better stay here. Better protect the familiar." And so the gap between your current self and your future self persists. Small habits feel difficult. Opportunities feel intimidating. Progress feels slow. But here's the powerful insight. When the future identity begins to feel familiar, recognizable, the brain starts cooperating. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually, as the nervous system begins to accept a version of you that could exist, behavior starts to align. Visualization becomes more than daydreaming. It becomes a training ground for identity. Each clear image, each vivid scenario, helps your mind feel comfortable with the unfamiliar self. You start seeing patterns of possibility rather than patterns of limitation. Let's break it down further. The current self dominates the present. Your decisions are filtered through the habits, beliefs, and identity you currently carry. The future self feels disconnected. Your brain doesn't have a reference point for the new version of you. It prioritizes what it already recognizes. Visualization bridges the gap. When you repeatedly imagine a future self in realistic, detailed ways, that self begins to feel familiar. And when familiarity increases, resistance decreases. Consider this. If someone imagines a future version of themselves running a business confidently, they may initially feel disconnected. They may even experience doubt. How could I ever operate at that level? What if I fail? But by visualizing not just the outcome, but the identity itself, how that person thinks, reacts, and responds, the brain begins to map the unfamiliar onto something familiar. Gradually, hesitation decreases. Opportunities that seemed uncomfortable start to feel possible. Small actions that align with the future identity become natural. This is why personal growth often feels slow. Your brain isn't rejecting success or abundance. It's protecting an identity it doesn't yet recognize. Until that identity becomes familiar, progress feels like pushing against resistance. But once the future self starts feeling like a person you already know, your brain begins to support the path. And here is the key coaching phrase to remember. Your mind resists what it cannot recognize. Make your future self familiar, and it will begin to guide your actions. As we close this chapter and move into the next, understand this transition. You now know that unfamiliar success triggers resistance, and that your future self feels distant because your brain struggles to relate. The next chapter will take you deeper, showing how your subconscious mind quietly interprets every thought, every decision, and every belief to maintain the story of who you are today. We will explore the mechanisms your subconscious uses to either reinforce limitations or unlock new possibilities. By the end of that chapter, you'll understand why uncovering and reshaping hidden beliefs is the real leverage point for creating a life aligned with the future self you've been struggling to meet. Chapter 6. Confidence is a side effect of self-alignment. In the last chapter, We explored why your future self can feel like a stranger. Your mind struggles to relate to the person you could become, and until that identity feels familiar, resistance dominates. But once you begin taking action that stretches toward that identity, something remarkable happens. Something that most people misunderstand about personal growth. Confidence is not created by words, it emerges from alignment. Most people think confidence comes from talking themselves into it. Affirmations, motivational quotes, pep talks. They repeat phrases like, I am confident, I am capable, I can do this. And for a brief moment, these words may feel inspiring, but the feeling is often fleeting. Confidence that arises from statements alone is fragile, because it hasn't yet been tested against reality. Real confidence doesn't come from words. It comes from matching your behavior to your potential. Every time your actions align with your capabilities, your nervous system notices. Every time you take a step that reflects what you know you're capable of, the mind registers it as truth. Confidence appears naturally. Not because you forced it, not because you said it, but because you acted in accordance with your real abilities. Think about this for a moment. When someone repeatedly avoids doing what they know they could do, insecurity grows. It shows up as hesitation, self-doubt, overthinking, excuses. The mind notices the contradiction. This person knows they could do more, yet they are acting differently. Insecurity is simply the nervous system pointing out that your behavior and your potential are misaligned. Now consider the opposite. A person begins taking actions that align with their strengths, their knowledge, and their values. Even small actions. Even actions that feel uncomfortable at first. What happens? Confidence begins to grow. Slowly at first, like a seed sprouting beneath the surface. Each aligned action reinforces the nervous system. Each choice that reflects capability signals to the mind. This is true. This is possible. This is why temporary bursts of courage don't create lasting confidence. Showing up once for a big presentation might feel good. Finishing one challenging project might feel rewarding. But until the behavior consistently matches internal potential, the nervous system remains alert. True confidence arises from repeated alignment. Here's a critical distinction. Action without belief feels forced. It can create stress and doubt. Belief without action feels hollow. It can create temporary inspiration. Action aligned with capability feels natural. It creates energy, momentum, and self-trust. Confidence is not a goal, it's the byproduct. It emerges when behavior matches potential, over and over again. Think of alignment like a tuning process. Every decision you make, every habit you form, is like a knob on a dial. When your actions reflect your values, strengths, and abilities, the dial clicks into place. The system stabilizes. The nervous system relaxes. Confidence appears. And because it's built on real alignment, it lasts. It doesn't flicker or vanish when the situation changes. In contrast, when actions contradict capability, the mind generates tension. You may know you could do something, yet you avoid it. Your mind notices. Your nervous system notices. The contradiction feels uncomfortable. That tension is the signal. Alignment is missing. Fix the alignment. Remove the contradiction. Let actions match potential. And the discomfort disappears. Confidence appears. Here's a simple but powerful observation. When you behave beneath your potential, you feel doubt. When you behave above your potential, you feel stress, but the stress signals growth. When you behave at your potential, the mind relaxes and confidence arises naturally. The paradox is simple. Confidence is never created by trying to feel it. It is earned through alignment, consistency, and repeated proof that your behavior matches your potential. Now pause for a moment and reflect. Where in your life are your actions contradicting your capabilities? Where are you avoiding steps you know you could take? Where are you relying on words instead of behavior? The answers will point to the areas where natural confidence has yet to appear. And this is where the coaching phrase becomes essential. Confidence appears when your behavior matches your potential. Say it again. Let it sink in. Confidence is not given. It is revealed. It emerges when you stop pretending, stop overthinking, and start aligning action with ability. As we move into the next chapter, we will explore another critical layer: how your mind stores subconscious blocks that interfere with alignment and confidence. Because even when your actions are correct and your future self feels familiar, hidden beliefs can quietly sabotage your progress. The next chapter will teach you how to identify and dismantle those blocks, so alignment, and therefore confidence, can flow effortlessly. Now expand a longer chapter. Chapter 7: The lag between internal change and external results. This is where most people quit. Internal shifts happen first, but visible results come later. During the lag, doubt returns. Repetition phrase. Stay consistent during the invisible phase. Chapter 7: The lag between internal change and external results. In the last chapter, we learned that confidence emerges naturally when your behavior aligns with your potential. We understood that alignment is the real generator of self-trust, not words or fleeting inspiration. But even after that alignment begins, there's an often invisible, frustrating, and highly misunderstood phenomenon that stops most people from following through. It's called the lag between internal change and external results. Here's the truth few people talk about. You can change your thinking, your beliefs, and your actions dramatically. And for weeks, months, or even years, it may feel like nothing is happening externally. You might start making decisions differently. You might take bold actions you've avoided for years. You might finally step into unfamiliar situations with your nervous system adjusting, your future self beginning to feel familiar. Yet, the world often doesn't respond immediately. Opportunities don't flood in. Recognition may lag. Income may remain flat. Relationships may not shift overnight. And this is the point where most people quit. The lag is natural. The internal work, changing beliefs, reshaping identity, aligning actions, happens first. External results are the reflection of those internal shifts. The mind adjusts before reality does. The nervous system learns the new patterns before life bends to accommodate them. Your future self begins to feel familiar internally, but externally, the environment has yet to catch up. Imagine planting seeds in a garden. You water them diligently. You ensure they receive sunlight. You remove obstacles from the soil. At first, nothing is visible above the surface. Days go by. Weeks go by. You may even begin doubting your effort. Did I do something wrong? Maybe this won't work for me. Perhaps growth is impossible. The seeds are still growing. They're just growing below the surface. Your internal change works the same way. The roots of your new identity, new habits, and aligned actions are growing quietly. Visible results simply take time to emerge. This lag is why many people abandon change too early. They see a shift in thinking, a new habit forming, or a behavior that stretches their identity. And then, because the world hasn't immediately transformed, they assume failure. But real transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens invisibly. It happens in the unseen neural pathways forming. It happens in the subconscious rewiring itself to accept and reinforce a new identity. During this phase, doubt will return. It always does. Old beliefs whisper quietly. You've tried this before. It won't work. You're just imagining it. This isn't for you. Maybe you're not ready yet. These doubts aren't a sign that change isn't happening. They are a signal that the old identity is still partly active, still trying to defend familiarity. You might feel restless. You might feel like you're spinning your wheels. This is the invisible phase, the stretch between internal transformation and external proof. Here's what separates those who succeed from those who quit. Consistency during the invisible phase. You may not see it immediately, but every aligned action compounds internally. Every day you take a step that matches your potential. Every time you challenge the identity that held you back, you reinforce neural pathways. You solidify habits. You strengthen self-trust. You expand the future self that your brain is learning to recognize. External results always follow internal progress. It's just a matter of time. Think about someone learning a new skill, starting a business, or building a new relationship pattern. At first, progress is subtle. The business may not generate revenue immediately. The skill may feel awkward and slow. The new way of relating may feel uncomfortable. But internally, the nervous system is adapting. The brain is rewiring. The future self you are cultivating is growing more familiar, more real, and more confident. Every action taken during this phase compounds invisibly. Every bit of patience is a seed for later visible success. This is why repetition and persistence are so critical. It is easy to abandon change when nothing is visible. It is easy to return to familiar behaviors when external validation is delayed. But lasting transformation demands the opposite approach. You must stay consistent during the invisible phase. Repeat your aligned behaviors. Trust the process. Ignore temporary doubt. Let your internal growth solidify before expecting external proof. Here's a simple framework to remember. Internal shift first. Beliefs change. Identity stretches. Behavior aligns. Invisible growth. Neural pathways form. Confidence emerges internally. Identity stabilizes. External reflection. Opportunities appear. Results follow. Life bends to the new identity. If you understand the sequence, doubt loses its power. If you act consistently, the invisible phase becomes your advantage rather than a source of frustration. During this phase, your mind may attempt to trick you. It may offer shortcuts. It may suggest giving up. It may distract you with comparisons to others. All of these are tests. They are subtle pressures to revert to the familiar identity. Each time you resist the urge to quit, you reinforce your new identity. Each day you take aligned action despite the absence of visible results, you accelerate the eventual manifestation of success. Pause for a moment and reflect. Where in your life have you experienced the invisible phase? Perhaps it was when starting a new job, learning a skill, or trying to improve a relationship. You worked internally, made aligned decisions, and yet for weeks or months, the world didn't seem to respond. You almost quit, but didn't. That moment is exactly what this chapter is about. It's the space between internal growth and external evidence, the test that separates temporary motivation from lasting transformation. Remember this phrase. It is your anchor during every period of unseen progress. Stay consistent during the invisible phase. Repeat it to yourself whenever doubt creeps in. Let it remind you that transformation is not linear. Let it remind you that the work you do internally is always preparing the ground for results you haven't yet seen. As we prepare to move into the next chapter, understand this transition. You've learned that internal alignment produces confidence, and that progress often has a hidden lag before results become visible. Now we take the next step, how to uncover and dismantle the subconscious blocks that quietly resist this alignment. Because even when you're consistent, unseen, and aligned with your potential, hidden mental programming can still interfere. The next chapter will teach you to identify, confront, and remove those subconscious blocks, allowing both confidence and results to accelerate naturally. Chapter 8. Your environment is quietly editing your ambition. In the last chapter, we explored the invisible phase, the gap between internal change and external results, and learned how consistency during that time is the secret to eventual success. But even with alignment, persistence, and confidence, there's another force shaping your life that is rarely noticed: your environment. Your environment is not neutral. It doesn't simply exist around you. It quietly edits your expectations, your ambitions, and your sense of what's possible. Most people assume that ambition is purely internal. They believe it comes from motivation, discipline, or desire alone. But the truth is, the people, spaces, and systems around you are constantly influencing what you believe is achievable. Even without realizing it, your environment signals. What is realistic here? What is normal? What is acceptable? Here's the subtle danger. Most environments are average. Most social circles, workplaces, and communities carry invisible ceilings. Even well-intentioned people unconsciously communicate limits through their words, expectations, and behaviors. Over time, these cues shape your goals without you noticing. You start adjusting your ambitions downward. You aim for what feels safe and socially acceptable, rather than what truly excites or challenges you. Think about it like water in a mold. Pour it into a small cup, and the water naturally conforms to the shape of that container. Pour it into a larger vessel, and it expands to fill the space. Your mind behaves the same way. It takes the shape of the environment it inhabits. If your surroundings normalize limited thinking, cautious behavior, or fear of failure, your ambition slowly shrinks to match. If your surroundings normalize growth, risk-taking, and expansive thinking, your ambition naturally expands to match. Here's an example most people experience. Imagine someone with the potential to start a high-growth business. They are ambitious, creative, and capable, but their closest circle of friends constantly emphasizes stability. Don't take risks. Stick with what's safe. That's too big of a goal. Even if unspoken, the message is clear. Extraordinary goals are unusual and uncomfortable here. Subconsciously, the brain begins to interpret these cues as reality. Big goals start to feel risky. Expansion feels out of place. Ambition shrinks. And over time, the person may even self-edit their goals. That idea is too big for me. I'll settle for something more reasonable. All without consciously realizing the environment influenced them. Contrast this with a high-growth environment. People around you are stretching, experimenting, and achieving. They take risks and normalize outcomes you once thought impossible. They celebrate bold moves and create a culture where ambition is not extraordinary, it's expected. When you inhabit that environment, your mind absorbs the signals. Expansion is normal. Growth is expected. Success is achievable. Ambition doesn't need to be forced. It naturally rises to match the environment. Notice how gradual this influence is. It doesn't happen overnight. One conversation doesn't make you ambitious or shrink your goals. But repeated exposure shapes the subconscious expectations that quietly guide behavior. Your environment edits what you consider possible before you even consciously decide. This is why people who want extraordinary results often fail to get them in isolation. They can read books, watch motivational content, or listen to audios for hours. They can adopt the mindset techniques, visualization practices, and daily habits outlined in this audiobook. But if their day-to-day surroundings continually reinforce limited thinking, the internal work is subtly overridden. Your environment doesn't shout, "Stop." It whispers, "Keep your goals small. Keep your ambition safe. Don't rock the boat." And the mind obeys those subtle cues. Here's the coaching insight. To grow, you must consciously shape your environment. Seek spaces and people that normalize expansion. Surround yourself with those who are willing to take calculated risks, innovate, and push boundaries. Even small changes can have a massive effect. Join a community of high achievers. Spend more time with people who challenge you. Read, listen, and immerse yourself in stories of possibility rather than limitation. Gradually, your environment will reinforce the habits, beliefs, and identity you've been building internally. It will stop shrinking your ambition and start supporting the person you are becoming. Notice the subtle paradox. You often feel like you're choosing your goals internally, purely based on your own motivation. But in reality, those goals are shaped by the signals your environment sends about what's normal, achievable, and safe. Which is why ambitious people are careful about what and who they allow into their daily life. So pause for a moment and ask yourself, does my environment encourage expansion? Does it normalize risk-taking, growth, and bold action? Or does it quietly reinforce limitations, caution, and settling? Be honest. Your answers reveal why certain ambitions feel achievable, while others feel impossible. This is the phrase to internalize. Your environment edits your expectations. Repeat it to yourself often. It will help you notice where subtle edits are happening in your life. It will help you evaluate whether the people, places, and media around you are supporting the identity you're building or quietly editing it downward. As we transition to the next chapter, recognize the connection. Your internal growth, alignment, and confidence are vital, but without the right environment, even these shifts can be constrained. The next chapter will dive into how to remove subconscious blocks that sabotage your progress, even in supportive environments. Because no matter how aligned you become internally, hidden blocks can quietly disrupt growth, keeping your results smaller than your potential. By the end of the next chapter, you'll understand how to identify, confront, and dissolve the mental barriers that hold back the person you're capable of becoming. Chapter 9. When you outgrow your old psychological ceiling. In the last chapter, we examined how your environment quietly edits your ambition. We saw that even aligned actions and internal growth can be limited by subtle cues from your surroundings. Now we move to a more personal frontier, the psychological ceiling, the invisible limit your mind sets for what you can achieve. Every person carries one. It's not written on a piece of paper. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It rarely feels like an obstacle. But it exists, quietly shaping your results, controlling what you attempt, and governing how far you allow yourself to grow. A psychological ceiling is the upper boundary of what your mind currently believes is possible. It's the max level of achievement that feels safe, familiar, and believable to your subconscious. It may manifest as a plateau in income or career advancement, repeated challenges in relationships or health goals, persistent feelings of, I can't go any further. The tricky part is that the ceiling is subtle. You don't hit it like a wall. You gradually approach it, and then the internal resistance begins to creep in. Subtle self-sabotage is the warning signal. It often appears in forms you might not even recognize. Hesitation before a bold decision. Procrastination on important projects. Overanalyzing minor details. Avoiding opportunities that feel too big for you. This isn't laziness. It isn't fear of failure. It's your subconscious enforcing the limits of the current identity and the internal narrative you've carried for years. The brain is saying, you've done well so far, don't go beyond what feels safe. This is enough. Breaking through a psychological ceiling is not about learning more skills, reading more books, or following more advice. Those things help, but they don't touch the root cause. The ceiling is an identity issue. Your subconscious believes the limits are real. It trusts the old story about who you are and what you can achieve. Until you expand that story, until you expand your internal ceiling, your results remain capped. Think of your old ceiling like a room with low walls. Inside, everything fits perfectly. You move comfortably. You can operate efficiently. But if you want to grow, you can't simply rearrange the furniture. You have to raise the walls, expand the room, and give yourself the space to operate at a new level. Every new level of success requires a larger identity. Every step beyond your current results demands that your internal representation of who you are grows to accommodate it. Here's how the process usually works. Recognition. You notice the subtle patterns of limitation. Maybe your income hasn't grown in years, despite your efforts. Maybe relationships stagnate. Maybe you feel blocked creatively. Internal conflict. The desire to move forward clashes with the identity that feels familiar. Hesitation, doubt, and avoidance appear. Expansion. You deliberately act in ways that stretch your identity. You make decisions and take actions that feel slightly uncomfortable, slightly beyond the known. You gradually teach your subconscious that you are capable of more. Ceiling rises. As the identity expands, the internal resistance diminishes. Opportunities that once felt intimidating now feel natural. The results you previously believed were impossible now start appearing in your life. The challenge is patience and persistence. Your mind will resist expansion at first. It prefers the comfort of familiar ceilings. You may feel doubt, fear, or even guilt for pursuing something bigger than what your old identity allowed. That's normal. It's a sign you're moving in the right direction. The ceiling isn't meant to feel comfortable. It's meant to stretch you. Here's the key phrase to internalize. Expand the ceiling, expand the life. Repeat it. Let it remind you that growth is not accidental. It is a direct result of how far you allow your identity to stretch. Every time you take aligned action that feels slightly beyond what your old self could imagine, you are raising the ceiling. Every time you embrace discomfort and act despite subtle resistance, you are giving your future self permission to achieve more. Let's consider a practical example. A person has consistently earned a certain income for years. They know they could grow more, but internal limits have kept them from doing so. Opportunities appear, new clients, promotions, investments, but hesitation and doubt creep in. If they simply take bold action, test the boundaries, and gradually act in alignment with a new, expanded identity, something shifts. The internal narrative begins to change. I am capable of more than I previously believed. I can handle success at this new level. I deserve to operate at this higher standard. And once the narrative changes, the ceiling rises. The life expands to match the new identity. Here's another important point. Ceilings can appear in any area of life: career, health, finances, relationships, creativity. They are not always obvious. They are often reinforced by subtle social cues, past experiences, and self-limiting beliefs, which is why ongoing awareness is essential. You must notice when you're hesitating, when doubt appears, or when smallness feels safe. Those are your signals that you are approaching an old ceiling. And each time you choose to act beyond it, you teach your mind that the ceiling is expandable. Your internal growth, alignment, environment, and consistency all lead to this point. The person who perseveres through the invisible phase surrounds themselves with high-growth influences and continuously aligns behavior with potential is already preparing to break ceilings. But identity expansion is the final ingredient. Raise the ceiling internally first. Then the life will follow. So remember this phrase. Repeat it until it becomes a part of how you think. Expand the ceiling, expand the life. Let it remind you that limits are rarely external. They are internal stories quietly enforced by old beliefs and identity patterns. Change the identity. Expand the ceiling. Life adjusts naturally to match. As we transition to the final chapter, recognize the connection. You've learned to recognize internal scripts, protect and expand identity, align actions with potential, persist through the invisible phase, and navigate environments that influence ambition. Now, in the final chapter, we will integrate all these lessons and reveal the process for maintaining frequency, reinforcing alignment, and manifesting the life you've been building internally. Because this is where transformation becomes fully visible, and internal growth finally translates into unstoppable external results. Chapter 10. Designing a Life That Keeps Expanding. In the last chapter, we explored how to recognize and break through your psychological ceiling, how identity expansion raises the limits on what you can achieve. You now understand that growth isn't accidental. It's deliberate, and it requires awareness, alignment, and consistent action. But there's a deeper truth about success that most people never grasp. Growth is not a single event, it is a system. It's not about reaching a goal and stopping. It's about designing a life where expansion itself becomes the norm. Most people live in cycles. They chase a goal, more money, a promotion, a healthier body, a better relationship, and once they reach it, the momentum slows. The old patterns return. The internal scripts that once limited them reassert themselves. And soon, what felt like a breakthrough begins to feel ordinary again. The problem isn't ambition. It's design. You were taught to pursue goals as fixed destinations, rather than creating a framework that continually expands your potential. To design a life that keeps expanding, you must understand 3 key principles. 1. Growth is a system, not an event. Every breakthrough you've experienced, every new skill learned, every habit aligned, every psychological ceiling broken, was not a one-time miracle. It was the result of small, consistent steps repeated over time. Success is not a single moment. It's the cumulative effect of aligned behavior, internal shifts, and conscious environmental choices. Think of your life like a garden. You don't plant one seed and expect a forest overnight. You water, you prune, you adjust, you learn from seasons. Growth is continuous, responsive, and iterative. The moment you treat expansion as a system rather than a series of events, your mindset shifts from chasing results to building a life that naturally produces them. 2. Design a mindset that evolves continuously. Instead of focusing solely on external goals, focus on internal systems. What thoughts and beliefs are you reinforcing daily? Which habits are aligned with your future self? How are you interacting with your environment to maintain growth? Are you noticing assumptions, invisible resistance, or ceilings before they limit you? When you design your mindset as a system, the outcome is inevitable. You stop relying on motivation alone. You stop waiting for the right moment or external validation. Your life becomes responsive, flexible, and ever-expanding. Every thought, every decision, and every action feeds the system. Every small improvement compounds. And because the system is designed for evolution, growth never ends. 3. Life becomes an unfolding process rather than a fixed destination. Most people think success is a point on a map. Reach this income. Achieve this status. Hit this milestone. But fixed destinations are limiting. They create pressure and anxiety. They create artificial ceilings. And once the milestone is reached, the system often collapses because nothing is in place to continue the momentum. When you adopt an unfolding mindset, life becomes a continuous flow of possibility. Each step reveals the next opportunity. Each challenge becomes an invitation to expand. Each success becomes a platform for the next level. Expansion is no longer occasional. It becomes habitual, intrinsic, and automatic. Why this works? Because your brain thrives on familiarity, it eventually begins to see expansion itself as normal. The same nervous system that once resisted unfamiliar success begins to welcome growth as a standard state. You are no longer stretching against resistance, you are stretching with rhythm, naturally. Even your future self, once a stranger, is now an extension of your present identity. Your ambitions no longer feel risky, they feel expected. Your confidence is no longer borrowed. It emerges automatically from consistent alignment. And your environment, once a subtle editor of your ambition, now serves as reinforcement for continuous growth. Creating your system. Here's how to put this into practice. Identify key internal practices. Daily alignment exercises, reflection, visualization, or journaling. These ensure that your identity continues to expand. Monitor environmental cues. Surround yourself with high-growth people, media, and spaces that normalize expansion. Track assumptions and resistance. Notice when old scripts, doubts, or familiar patterns try to limit progress. Respond deliberately, reinforcing alignment rather than retreating. Design growth cycles. Set iterative, flexible goals that feed into each other. Rather than chasing a single milestone, create a loop of consistent progress and identity expansion. Celebrate alignment, not just results. Every time your behavior matches your potential, reinforce it. Recognize that internal proof precedes external manifestation. When this system is in place, your life becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Internal shifts produce confidence. Confidence produces aligned action. Aligned action produces results. Results feed back into identity expansion. And the cycle repeats, naturally, consistently, and powerfully. The coaching phrase to internalize. Expansion becomes your new normal. Say it every morning. Say it when you encounter doubt. Say it when resistance appears. Let it anchor you to the understanding that growth is not temporary. It is your operating system. When you adopt this mindset, every setback becomes feedback, not failure. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to stretch. Every milestone becomes a platform, not a finish line. At this stage, you are no longer chasing life. You are designing it. Your habits, thoughts, and environment work together to produce continuous growth. Your identity evolves naturally. Your future self is no longer a stranger. It is the present you in constant expansion. And when expansion becomes your normal, life itself transforms. Opportunities that once felt impossible now appear natural. Success is no longer a goal to be chased. It is a state you live in. Confidence, alignment, abundance, and fulfillment are no longer external rewards. They are the byproducts of a life intentionally designed to keep evolving. As this final chapter closes, pause and reflect. You have learned how to identify internal scripts, protect and expand identity, align actions with potential, navigate the invisible phase, manage environmental influences, break ceilings, and finally, design a system for continuous growth. Your life is no longer a series of goals or random events. It is a living, unfolding system, one that expands with every thought, action, and decision. Remember the phrase again, and let it guide every step forward. Expansion becomes your new normal. Because from this moment, growth is no longer occasional. It is consistent. It is inevitable. It is who you are. And the life you imagine, the one you've been working toward, aligning with, and preparing internally, is now ready to manifest fully, without resistance, as the natural reflection of the person you've become. Your journey doesn't end here. It continues, unfolding in alignment with your identity, supported by your environment, and fueled by the system you've designed. From here on, every step is a step of expansion. Expansion becomes your new normal. In closing, by now you've probably noticed something interesting. Your life has never been random. It has been patterned, shaped by assumptions you rarely questioned, identities you quietly protected, and decisions so small they felt insignificant at the time. But small decisions repeated over years become life directions. And once you understand that, something powerful happens. You stop waiting for life to change. You start noticing the tiny moments where change actually happens. The moment you challenge an assumption. The moment you try something your old identity would have avoided. The moment you choose growth instead of familiarity. These are the moments where your life begins unfolding differently. Not because of luck, not because of perfect timing, but because the internal architecture guiding your decisions has changed. And when that internal architecture changes, the external structure of your life must eventually follow. Confidence begins appearing in places it never existed before. Opportunities that once felt intimidating start feeling natural. And slowly, you realize something remarkable. The person you used to be could not have lived the life you are now capable of building, which means your real job is not chasing success. Your real job is continuously expanding the person you are becoming. So here is your challenge. Pay attention to the invisible decisions. Question the assumptions that once felt obvious. And every day, take one action that your old identity would have avoided. Do that consistently, and you won't just change your results. You will change the entire trajectory of how your life unfolds.